On this episode, seeing the wood for the trees when you're on the journey to get a budget to maintain your WSUD assets. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro, where we are talking about how local governments can go about getting a budget to maintain their WSUD assets. And we're following on from the last episode. So in the last episode, I was elaborating on an idea and a point that was made to me by Emma O'Neill from Ipswich City Council. And Emma's point was that while in all the previous episodes of this series, I talked about a number of really discrete steps that a local government could go through to obtain a budget for maintaining their WSUD assets, there was something that bound all this together. And that was the ability for local governments to network and to share knowledge between them to speed up the process. And the way this could be facilitated by local governments, like talking to themselves directly or setting up like email and kind of networking community of practice groups between their maintenance practitioners. It could be facilitated by the not-for-profits and the NGOs of the world, like Healthy Waterways, as a South East Queensland example, or how consultants have a bunch of knowledge to share there. And Emma's absolutely right. That is a really fundamental and foundational and key point of how the local governments in South East Queensland have gone and got a budget for maintenance. What I want to riff on in this episode is how I overlooked that. Because here's the funny thing, right? I'm really fortunate to have been able to spend time around the industry and observe these local governments as they've gone about getting these budgets. But I haven't actually been directly, personally in a local government during that time that that's happened, right? They've all gone and done that, their staff putting in the hard work and getting the outcomes. The one spot that I've tangentially been involved in this from is in a bit of that networking and sharing knowledge. I worked at Healthy Waterways for a while, did some stuff there to facilitate it. I participated a little bit in one of those email groups that I kind of alluded to in the last episode. And what I found really funny is that of all the steps in this process, the one that just did not even occur to me to include was the one that I'd been involved with. And that brings me to the topic of perspective and something else that I've observed in this process. What I have observed is this, that while, like from the outside, when I worked at Healthy Waterways and had the opportunity to observe the local governments doing this really good work, it was always very clear to me from the outside that there was a common structure that the local governments were going through. Like, it was really obvious, like everyone repeated essentially the same structure. A little bit of the order would change here and there, what it was called would change, but fundamentally the steps that were being undertaken always looked the same. Exactly who got briefed to would change, but like the fundamental steps were the same. But on occasion at Healthy Waterways, I'm thinking of one occasion in particular, we were running a training about maintenance and a sense about how you get a budget to do this stuff, because it's the real sticking point. Once you have a budget, the actual activities of how to do maintenance suddenly become really easy and like people just get into it and get going. But on this particular occasion, we were running this training. We arranged a call in from a local government officer whose council had successfully got a budget for maintenance. That person explained how they did it. And then we ran a session essentially with the participants where we're like, okay, what would be the steps that we should set up here for how to do it? Let's try and nail this out. And we were trying to head towards the steps kind of like I outlined in the previous videos, but tailored for that situation. And the participants got there, but it was quite challenging, right? It took some time, it took some discussions, and that's totally cool. And at the time, I found that I was a bit like, okay, that's intriguing. For me as an outsider looking in, it's really clear. Admittedly, I've had a lot of time to look in on this and see what's going on, so maybe it's just a perception thing. It's quite clear, but for the people who are in it and amongst it, it's tougher to see the steps and to see the pathway while you're on the trip, so to speak. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. It was just an observation at that point in time. But then Emma, let's come back to Emma's comment. Emma pointing out here that there was this step that I'd missed. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. The one step that I couldn't see was the step that I'm involved in. There's a perspective thing going on here. It's like when you have a bird's eye view to see this from the outside, it's pretty clear how this works. But when you're in amongst it, like, what's the saying? It's hard to see the wood for the trees. When you're in amongst it, it's hard to see the broad steps that need to get need to be done, need to get done in order for this to work. And I've then experienced that more recently because I'm working on, I suppose, on contract for a particular local government. I'll be, restrained with names, who are trying to improve their budget for this sort of stuff, for maintaining their WSUD assets. And I found it really interesting how once I've gone into a local government and suddenly been involved in the process, not as an observer on the outside, but actually in it, how suddenly I've had trouble seeing the wood for the trees. It's like as soon as you're down in the dirt, in the details, even though the process is so clear and so useful, it is still difficult. And it's easy to get pulled aside, pulled astray. It's just hard to see the wood for the trees. And I think the reason that I'm getting at this is maybe heading towards a thought or a suggestion. For anyone who's in a local government who doesn't yet, or which doesn't yet, have a budget for this stuff. And you're looking at the process that we laid out in the previous episodes. I'm going to put it out there. Don't be disheartened if you see that process. You're like, sweet, let's do it, and you start to get into it, and it suddenly feels really hard, and you start to feel a little bit lost in that process. Because I'm going through that a little bit at the moment with this particular local government that I'm involved with. I would say, don't be disheartened. I think that is actually part of the process. I think this stuff is. I think the steps provide a really good framework within which to work. But you need to keep coming back to them and just kind of checking in with where you are on them, because it's really easy to be lost and to not be able to see the wood for the trees, so to speak. And yeah, that's where I wanted to go with that. I found it really interesting when Emma suggested to me that there was this other step, and the one step I couldn't see was the one that I'd been involved with. And I think, I think I'm going to end it there. Enjoy. Thank you for tuning in. Let me know how you go. If you're in one of those local governments, this is where I want to end this. If you're in one of these local governments who are still working towards getting a budget for you maintaining your WSUD assets, and you've looked at those steps, I would love to hear from you as to how that's coming along. Does the process fit? Does the process make sense? Do you look at that process and go, oh yeah, that can work? And then when you're in amongst it and trying to make it happen, how easy is it to stay on track and to not get caught up with the little side distractions and things that can go on and take place? I'd love to hear. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.